Siddur Snippets are generously sponsored by the Saka family and by Ayelet and Avram Foreman as well. We are on the bracha of Valam Al Shinim, still the introduction we last left off. How many brachas really are there to the Amida? We call it Shmona Esrei. It's a machlokas, the Bavli and the Yerushalmi, where there were originally 18. Valam Al Shinim is number 19. And three opinions in the Gemara how we arrived at that number, and therefore what right do we have to add a 19th? Or there were originally 17. Valam Al Shinim is number 18, and that's why it is still called Shmona Esrei. We suggested several reasons why maybe it's still called Shmona Esrei. So Valam Al Shinim, we read the Rambam. The Rambam gave us the historical background of what precipitated, what led to the genesis of this bracha, Valam Al Shinim. The time of Rabbi Gamliel II in Yavna, when the Sanhedrin was relocated to Yavna, after the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash, the heretics, the Tzedukim, were seeking to corrupt the Jewish Masorah, and they were Moser. They tried to turn their rabbinic colleagues into authorities and to cost Jewish lives. And it was a devastating time for the traditional Jewish community, for the observant community, for the Masorah community. So much so the Rambam writes, Rabbi Gamliel felt he had no choice but to author a bracha, to institute into our davening, to incorporate. We'll see, originally it was not every day, 3 times a day, the way we have it now. Originally it was only on fast days. The same way we say, Nenu on fast days, we have a certain insertion to the Amida on fast days. The original hope would be that on a fast day, a day of tshuva, we can invoke Hashem's mercy to eliminate and altogether obliterate those forces that were challenging our Masorah. But ultimately, it wasn't enough. And the Tzedukim, the threat that they posed, the damage that they did was such that it was instituted, ultimately Shmuel HaKatan, the author will describe right now, instituted it not only on Tanesim, on fast days, but it was added to our Amida, to our Shmona Esrei, 3 times a day. So that was the threat, and that was what inspired this bracha. So the Gemara in Brachos tells us that when Rabbi Gamliel was motivated to 500 years after Anshe Knesset HaGadola authored the Amida, the Shmona Esrei, to institute another bracha, he wondered who could author it. We know the problem, we know the theme, but who? Who from the generation can we recruit? Who's qualified? Who's credible? Who is the one who should author this bracha? Who could find the right words? What was he worried about, Rabbi Gamliel? We don't find this elsewhere. Nobody challenges which of the Anshe Knesset HaGadola, what was their motive. For this bracha, all of a sudden, we're worried about motive. For this bracha, we're worried about how pure a person is. We're worried about a bias. We're worried about who it is. So much so that Rabbi Gamliel was stuck. He announced who can author it. And ultimately, who was the author that emerged? None other than Shmuel HaKatan. Gemara Brachos Chav Ches Amud Aleph. Who was Shmuel HaKatan? Why was he called HaKatan? He was low in stature, low in height. What made him a katan? Couldn't grow a beard? Why was he called Shmuel HaKatan? Why was he Shmuel HaKatan? And why was it only him? The Mishnah in the 4th parak of Pirkei Avos teaches us that Shmuel HaKatan says, Ben foleivecha al tismach. We all invoke this teaching of Shmuel HaKatan. We remember it when on Pesach we don't say full Hallel. For the remainder of Pesach, when at the Seder we remove some of the wine. During the Makos, what was the teaching of Shmuel HaKatan? We have enemies, and we need to eliminate those enemies from the earth. But we don't take joy. They too are creatures of Hashem. What's extraordinary about this quote of Shmuel HaKatan in Pirkei Avos is Shmuel HaKatan the original author? Is that an original thought? Where did he get it from? It's not a trick question. It's a pasuk. Shmuel HaKatan was quoting a pasuk. And yet, because he didn't just quote the pasuk, but he lived the pasuk. It's who he was and it's how he lived. It was his humility, his sensitivity, his love for all of humanity, that even though, of course, he was willing to confront and to challenge and eliminate dangers and threats like enemies, but ben foleivecha al tismach. The reason it's attributed to him is he didn't just say it. That would be plagiarism. He could have qualified to be an Ivy League president, but that would be plagiarism. He didn't just plagiarize a pasuk. The reason it's attributed to him is because he lived that pasuk. That's who he was. That's how he lived. That's what the Bartanura explains. That it's attributed to Shmuel HaKatan, says the Bartanura, because that pasuk was his constant companion. It was how he identified. Hu haya omer. The hu haya omer is he all throughout Pirkei Avos, who he was and how he lived, Haya Omer, through his example and through his actions. That's what he says. It's Shmuel HaKatan. So why do you need somebody, bin folei vecha al tismach? Why is motive so important with this bracha? So I would suggest two reasons. Number one, because it was pretty brazen to author another bracha 500 years after the Anshe Knesset Agadola already closed the Amida. To say somebody should now add to it, modify it, an addendum, expand it, you needed the right person, the righteous person to do it. But moreover, what's the theme of the bracha? What's our hope in this bracha? We're seeking the demise of fellow Jews. V'lam al shinim, we think about enemies in general. This is a bracha. Rav Shechter was here alluded to that we should be having kavanah, particularly during this war. We're thinking about the broad category of enemies, but the specific motivation, the opening word, v'lam al shinim, v'lam minim, the minim, the tzdukim, are fellow Jews. So, if a person's going to find the words to author a prayer for the demise of a fellow Jew, they better be pure. They better have a pure motive. It better not be tainted or biased by anything else. And the only person of Gamliel concluded who was deemed worthy of doing such a thing was none other than Shmuel HaKatan. Shmuel HaKatan, who had already proved that he didn't have a personal bias when it came to these matters, when it came to these issues, because that's the Mishnah of us, that's how he lived, that's who he was. He therefore was uniquely qualified to author it and to write it. And the Gemara there tells the story of how he wrote it. And it was forgotten, and he had to remember it, and he had to reestablish it, and originally only on fast days with the hope that that would be enough to invoke Hashem's mercy and to stall the progress of the minim and mashinim and the tzedukim. But when it proved unsuccessful, then it had to be expanded to be said at all of our tefillos. We'll continue with this tomorrow night, but you could ask, Rabbi Yonasan Shaibshitz is bothered. We don't have minim. We have minim. We don't have tzedukim. Tzedukim, karaim. It's also this week's Parsha, Lo Savaru Eish, the origin of eating cholent on Shabbos, hot food to prove you're not a tzeduki. So why are we still saying this bracha? Who should we be thinking of when we say this bracha today? We'll continue with tomorrow night.